Chair. Order. Deirdre Brock to move the motion.
Branch closures, and it's a pleasure to serve under your chairship, Sir Charles. So here we are again. This debate feels a bit like Groundhog Day, doesn't it? Yet more bank branches are set to bite the dust as the network rapidly shrinks amongst woolly promises of support and training for vulnerable customers. Selective statistics are spun to show that counter services just aren't being used enough, leaving most of us puzzled when we see the local branch still bustling with life. And that is certainly the case for the Leith RBS. Now, I confess I am surprised at having to intervene in this debate because I represent an area which was well served by banks until recent days. More often, I've supported work from members in rural areas who have fought valiantly against the impact of closures in their communities. But with both RBS and now TSB planning to shut up shop, the Bank of Scotland looks set to be the last high street branch in Leith. And for how long, who knows? When even the most densely populated part of Scotland is down to the last bank standing, then you know you're in trouble. Now, firstly, I do want to pay tribute to the incredible staff at the RBS branch in Leith who have been left worrying for their futures after this closure was announced. They are a legendary bunch, well known for going above and beyond for their customers, providing that old-fashioned notion of top-notch customer service. The branch has been a well-known and well-used fixture in the area, Sir Charles, and it should remain to serve the people of Leith into the future. It's located in a vibrant and growing, my goodness is it growing, part of the city, serving diverse banking needs from the many small startups that rely on cash to people who are more financially vulnerable and can't easily head uptown. I find the decision absolutely baffling.
Would the Honourable Member give...
Yes, of course.
Thank you very much. The Honourable Member touches on something which is common to many of us in Edinburgh. 70% of the bank branches have been closed down in the past few years. And I, this morning, heard from a constituent in the Newbridge village who is being hit very hard by the closure of the RBS branch there. Her autistic son needs cash every day, and she will now have to get a bus to a different part of the city to get him cash because there is no post office available either. Does she agree with me that this is a situation we just cannot allow to go on?
I absolutely agree, and I will be making those points in my speech, of course. But I think her example perfectly illustrates exactly why branches need to remain open and that these banks must be encouraged to do that. I have to say, and in agreement with that, these further closures from RBS in particular is a disappointment because it was a once proud Scottish brand. It's now a subsidiary of NatWest, of course. But this bank can trace its origins to Edinburgh in 1727 at the time of the Scottish Enlightenment. It's credited with providing the world's first overdraft, a mixed blessing perhaps, but it did create a wide branch network as part of Scotland's successful and stable multi-bank system. Now, times may have changed, but the move towards a more centralised control of banking doesn't seem like progress to me. For RBS to soon have just 3 city centre branches in Edinburgh is a sorry state of affairs. Yes, of course.
Can I commend the Honourable Lady for Edinburgh North and Leith for bringing this forward? The Honourable Lady is consistent in this one, and I'm here to support her. My own constituency, Ulster Bank, is a subsidiary of RBS, closed the Ballyhenge branch in February past, and now intends to close the neighbouring Downpatrick branch in November shortly. Does the member not agree that the abdication of duty of care to rural banks is unacceptable at a time when profits are so high, and that legislation underlying this duty of care should come before this House as current guidelines aren't implementing any safeguards?
Order. Can I just? Are you happy, as the mover of the motion in a half-hour debate, to take interventions?
Yes,
you don't have to.
I am. I was
you are
aware,
happy,
Sir Charles, that a number of people expressed interest in
just as long as you're happy, that's fine.
And on behalf of branch closures in their area, so I have allowed for that in my timing. So thank you. Yes, I absolutely agree with the honourable gentleman, and I will be making some points about that later as well. But yes, the impacts on rural areas are ones that are particularly stark and ones that I'm very much aware of, having been part of the Scottish Affairs Committee, where we did an inquiry. Yes.
Thank you. Thank you, the honourable member, for giving way. Frome, in my constituency, will lose its last bank, population of 30,000 people, and it's following in the footsteps of other market towns in my area, Castlecarey, Martock and Wincanton. I know that many of my elderly constituents are very worried that they will lose their physical face-to-face contact with their banks. So does the honourable member agree with me that to combat the loss of bank branches, we need to support communities in triggering the development of community banking hubs that safeguard people's right to have that face-to-face contact with their banks, particularly in rural areas?
Absolutely, and I will be making some points about that later as well. And I say this with a heavy dose of sarcasm, however, Sir Charles. I suppose it can't be expected of banks to cut their profits and serve their customers when they have shareholders to please. Even when, like RBS, taxpayers bailed them out when they needed it and still own a third of the business. How often can we bemoan bank branch closures in this place while the government sits on its hands and refuses to meaningfully intervene? The speedy decline in branches is alarming. Almost 6,000 gone across the UK at a rate of 54 a month since 2015. Do we just accept this sleepwalking into a cashless society and the deepening of the digital divide? Should we all be forced into using systems that may go against our very human preferences for face-to-face services just because it's cheaper for the banks? What kind of society do we want to be? One which looks out for everyone, or one where markets rule and only the fittest survive? Yes.
Yeah, I thank my honourable friend for securing this debate, and she's right. It's like Groundhog Day. How many times in the last 9 years have we been in this chamber discussing this very issue? The decimation of banking in rural Scotland, particularly around the Argyll and Bute, and recently the branch in Helensburgh, the RBN branch in Helensburgh, has announced its closure. Does she agree with me that financial institutions are abdicating their responsibility to the people who were forced to dig deep to bail them out during the crash? And once again, what we're seeing is these banks putting shareholder dividend ahead of any form of social responsibility.
I absolutely agree with the honourable gentleman. He is absolutely correct, and I think everyone here has just agreed with him as well. I think, moving on from that point, existing legislation to protect against bank branch closures is far too weak. There are some powers from the Financial Conduct Authority to protect cash services, but not bank branches. Yet in 2019, the FCA's own research found that branch closures presented particular challenges for older people who would have to travel further to reach a branch. It also said that older people were less likely to turn to mobile banking, which increased their risk of financial exclusion. But it seems the banks can just follow the tick box guidance and then fire ahead with the closure anyway. We need to introduce a community right to physical banking services. And here, can I commend the work of my colleague, Drew Hendry, the member for Inverness, Nairn, Badenoch and Strathspey, to introduce a bill for such a measure. And I hope we can get cross-party consensus to take forward something similar. I would be also very curious to hear the Minister's view on whether he thinks bank branch closures conflict with the Equality Act, specifically Part 3, which states that service providers must ensure equal access to services for all individuals. We already have all the evidence we need of the impact on communities, on older people, on people with disabilities, on small businesses that rely on cash trade. Yes.
Thank the member for giving way, and in doing so, the reason I want to raise it on this very point is that we have banks who say that they are offering another service because they will work with banking hubs. Those banking hubs are not there all the time, and they are working just the hours that suit them, so it's not giving accessibility to all. It is just suiting the banks just to tick a box that they have said that they are available.
Yeah, and there are delays around those hubs, which I will reference later in my speech. But yes, the gentleman's quite right. Research from Which found 65% of consumers would find it difficult without the option to access their bank branch. Age UK says 4 out of 10 over 65s don't manage their money online. And we also know that paper documents are just preferred by many people and can help them keep track of their finances better. Yes?
Thank you for your question. Can
Thank you for bringing the debate, but also being incredibly generous with your half an hour, and it's much appreciated. Just on that point, you said at the very beginning around selective statistics being spun, and the branch in Rutherglen that's earmarked for closure, I stood outside it and asked people about it. And they were being told, particularly older people, that they were to go in and use the app in the bank branch to present the statistics that actually people were transferring to using digital tools rather than the physical tools in the branch, even though they'd gone into the branch to do it. Do you agree with me that the problem with this is that the bank has been dressing up some of the statistics about branch use to try and sell the argument that they should close the branch?
There was a chorus of agreement from behind me then, the honourable member would have heard. I think that it is felt that some of these statistics are being massaged to suit the bank's purposes. That's certainly the impression that many of us have gained. Now, I am going to say I'm not immune to the financial pressures and challenges for high street banks. Digital banking is cheaper and more convenient, at least when you can get your password to work and it recognises your face. It's used by the majority of us, but it is not for everyone, and minorities matter. RBS told me that 80% of our active current account holders now use our digital services. So what about the 1 in 5 who don't? That is a lot of people being left adrift and losing their financial independence. Now, I accept keeping branches open is costly, so there needs to be greater initiatives to encourage banks to stay in town. Banking hubs, as has been mentioned, have been positively received. They are not a replacement for branches, but they are a helpful option for some places, offering more personal and private space for banking than post offices alone. But where are they all? The rollout may be picking up a bit now, but so far it has been woefully slow. Since 2015, we have seen almost 635 branches close in Scotland, yet we've only seen 9 hubs opened and 15 sites recommended as suitable in Scotland since the trials ended in 2021. At best, it's only scratching at the surface of the problems created by the loss of our branch networks. And while any community can apply to be considered for a hub, not so many will be successful, as Link has to independently assess the needs of the location using the same strict criteria for all. Still, many feel they don't replace the need to access physical bank branches. Yes, post offices have increasingly provided access to cash withdrawals and deposits, but otherwise offer only limited services. In 2020, Citizens Advice found major issues surrounding the post office's ability to provide even those services, which included limited training on personal and business banking, cash supply issues, and security concerns. For many, a bank branch offers access to the wider economic network, where you can seek financial advice and make inquiries about other financial products, such as mortgages. These services can't be provided by the post office. And alongside this, the post office's ability to fill the gaps left by branch closures is limited because of reductions over the years in the number of post offices themselves. Perhaps, returning to the bank hubs proposal, its criteria needs to be loosened up a little. Perhaps communities shouldn't have to wait until the last branch leaves their town or area before banking hubs will even be considered, then face lengthy delays before anything gets going. With coordinated efforts from everyone involved, locally and nationally, surely we can get the rollout widened and accelerated to better fill the digital divide that is deepening every day. And I'd be interested to hear the Minister's thoughts on that. Can I, just in closing, Sir Charles... yes, of course.
She's right to point to the need to look at the criteria for the community banking hubs. You know, in my constituency, I'm left with one bank in one town in Ammanford. All the other market towns have lost their banks, but the community hub proposals won't work because the towns are so small. So is there an argument that the criteria should be extended to look at an amalgamation of rural towns when they're within 20 or 30 miles together, to have a community hub serving 2 or 3 towns put together, as opposed to the current criteria, which works against the interests of rural Wales?
Well, I mean, you know, the honourable gentleman would be more familiar with the needs of those communities than I, but I think any proposal is worth looking at, and certainly sort of community banking between several towns, depending on the distance between them, of course, because I have a mother-in-law who lives up in the Highlands and has to travel 10 miles to her nearest bank. So, you know, these are all sort of things that have to be considered carefully, but certainly the proposal is worth looking at. Can I just, in closing, Sir Charles, give a nod to a fantastic community bank in my area of Leith, the fantastic Castle Community Bank. for the work they're doing in filling that banking gap for many people in Leith where the other banks have failed them. As a credit union, they've been a real asset to the community, supporting vulnerable people to break cycles of debt and get affordable access to loans and other financial services. Their focus is on helping people, not serving shareholders, and I am very happy to give them my thanks and my support for their efforts. Just in closing, perhaps RBS should take a leaf from their own book and remember the people they serve. Now, their website proudly claims the bank has a history of making life easier for its customers. The bank is committed to serving Scottish communities and putting the interests of communities first. Time for that commitment to be made clear in bricks and mortar and not just words. Thank you.
Thank the Honourable Lady for her excellent speech. The question is that this House has considered the Royal Bank of Scotland branch closures. Minister to respond.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd like first to commend the member for Edinburgh North and Leith on securing this debate. I know this is a subject which is important to many of her constituents and indeed to many others whose members are represented in the House. Just 2 weeks ago, I responded to an adjournment debate on the issue of branch closures, and I want the House to understand that I have been working on this issue very much in my brief, so I'm very familiar with the issues that have been brought up. As I said during that debate, and I say again today, banks and building societies are essential in enabling people to manage their money on a day-to-day basis, and they therefore hold a privileged place in our society. As a result, it's vital that firms ensure that all customers, wherever they live, have appropriate access to banking and cash services. Now, we all recognise that banking has changed significantly in recent years, as indeed the Honourable Lady has outlined. The shift towards online and mobile access, though not complete, is significant, and it means that customers now have many more ways to access banking services conveniently and securely. And customers have clearly taken up those opportunities. Recent FCA data shows that almost 9 in 10 adults banked online or used a mobile app, and by contrast, roughly about a fifth of adults regularly use a bank branch. And indeed, that fifth is very important. I don't want the House to misunderstand me, but it's important to set out the scale of the change that we have seen in quite a small number of years. But this does not mean that we should do away with in-person banking services, which remain critically important for many people, not just for access to cash, which I'm going to talk about, but also because of the social and sort of intangible place that they hold in the high street. And I recognise that, and the government recognise that as well. The government has taken steps, and indeed is the first ever government to have taken steps in law to protect access to cash. The Financial Services and Markets Act 2023 established the FCA as the lead regulator to deliver this, and it gives powers to the FCA to ensure the reasonable provision of cash withdrawal and deposit facilities, including free services to individuals. Following this, the government published a policy statement setting out its policies on access to cash. The FCA must have regard to this as part of its regulatory approach. This statement sets out that people and businesses should be no further than 3 miles away from a free cash access point. Indeed, the FCA recently held a consultation on its proposed regulatory regime. Under the proposals, designated banks and business building societies will be required to assess and fill gaps, or indeed potential gaps in cash access provision that significantly impact consumers and businesses. Of course.
James Stone.
Charles, I thank you, Mr. for giving way. He makes the point about the distance that people have to travel to get their branches. The County of Sutherland is 2,028 square miles, and we have one branch, one only branch. So my plea is very simple. Look, governments come and go, and I wish the Minister well on a personal level. Both in Edinburgh and London, governments come and go. Could I ask that the officials in the Treasury are made aware that for this particular statistic, as it applies to Sutherland, and whatever happens in the future, that they would bear that in mind when they think about branch closures?
Minister.
I really appreciate that intervention from the Honourable Member, and I'll say this to him very directly. One thing I was going to say later in my speech, but I'll say it now, is that the criteria that is assessed by Link, working with Cash Access UK, for banking hubs and looking at this whole issue of access to cash, indeed he mentioned his very rural constituency, I think in the case of rural constituencies needs to be amended. I've communicated that to the industry, and I hope that over the coming weeks and months that will happen, because it is clearly not working in a relatively small number of instances, but in rural areas where the rules do not appear to be flexible enough. But I think that's very useful. Yes, I will take that.
50 banks in Northern Ireland have closed, with only one banking hub having opened. Would you agree with me that that's just not acceptable? The criteria does need change, and we've heard great plans of the government to help change it. But when's it going to happen? When is the criteria going to change, and when is the government going to take this on board?
Minister. I'm very happy to speak with the Honourable Lady about the challenges that Northern Ireland in particular has in this regard, and I think that the statistics she outlined speaks for itself. And in relation to the criteria, this is an industry-led set of rules. The government does not determine which banks branches open or shut. But I do think that there is definitely much more work that we can do with the industry, working with them to see if we can improve things. What I would say is that the industry has come out, UK Finance, and said that banking hubs, over the next 18 months, there'll be 225 opened. That will have a rapid increase in the speed of opening banking hubs than we've seen in recent years, and the industry is committed to that. But I'm very happy to have a conversation with her separately about Northern Ireland in particular. What I would like to respond to the Honourable Lady about in relation to the Equalities Act 2010, like all service providers, banks and building societies are indeed bound by the Equalities Act, and it's not our judgment that they have somehow contravened it. They are bound to make reasonable adjustments where necessary in the way that they deliver their services. In the time remaining to me, Sir Charles, I think that what I'd like to do is to talk a little bit about banking hubs in particular, because this has been, I think it's been really a unique proposition that has proved in most cases very popular where they have appeared. The issue has been, let's get them faster and let's have more of them. They are a good option where banks are forced. Yes, of course.
Sarah Guy. Thank you, Minister, for giving way. I've already mentioned that in my constituency there's many banks that have been closing and many market towns have been left without a bank. But also, I know that many businesses are really concerned about the lack of banks in their area. People still want to use cash, and businesses are still taking cash, but now need to travel many miles across the constituency at the end of the working day to be able to deposit their cash safely. So will the Minister comment on how his department proposes to manage the negative impacts on some of our vibrant businesses in my constituency that make up the kind of villages and towns that will now, those businesses having to travel much further to be able to deposit their cash safely?
Minister.
My comment in response is in part to repeat what I've already said, which is, in law, we were the first government to legislate on access to cash in law. In the Financial Services and Markets Act 2023, it sets out that people should be no more than 3 miles away from access to cash. In relation to banking hubs and the ability of small businesses to use bank branches or a banking hub, that's why banking hubs are so important. And if I may go on to talk about how these hubs help people and businesses withdraw and deposit cash, pay in cheques and check their balance through the post office counter. They also provide a community banker who can help people with wider banking services, from making a transfer to providing support for fraud and scam victims. Now, the hubs are deployed by Cash Access UK, which is the company owned and funded by 9 major high street banking providers, in response to an assessment of the community's cash needs by Link, the coordinating body, and that sets the criteria, and I've already explained how I think that in many instances, I think this criteria does need to be changed by the industry, and I hope that they will do so. And to ensure that there is no gap in the provision of services, industry has committed that if a hub is recommended, they will not close the branch that it replaces for up to 12 months until that hub is open. If there's a delay beyond that, a temporary hub will be put in its place. Of course.
I thank the Minister very much for giving way. And, I appreciate that there is an internal logic to what he's saying about the banking hubs and mobile banks even, but it doesn't reflect the actuality. Because when I was informed about the branch closure in Newbridge, which I mentioned earlier, it stated that there was a post office 1.7 miles away where cash could be obtained. That post office is closing, and even if it weren't, if you don't have a card, there's no way of getting there.
Minister.
I thank the Honourable Lady for her point, and what I would say about the notification of when things are closing, banks and building societies are required to provide customers with at least 12 weeks' notice, a summary of the firm's analysis of customer needs, including those who use the branch, and information on how to continue accessing services after the closure. Firms should also provide the support that customers will need to transition to channels such as digital or telephone services. The support, I want to be clear about this, is it's not just saying you need to go and do this. Firms are meant to provide that sort of support, and the impact of any planned closures on their customers must be carefully considered, and any firm that does not adhere with what I've said is not doing their duty, and that point should be set out. Yes.
Giving way again, and I wonder on that point around statistics if you would look at that, because I think some of the statistics used by the banks have been quite misleading actually, and I think that's worth looking at. Just on the question of banking hubs, we have one in my constituency in Cambuslang, which is a fantastic resource, but it was there because all the other banks closed. What I want to try and avoid in Rutherglen when the Royal Bank of Scotland closes is all the other branches there closing. It's a useful tool to have in the community, but does he agree that really keeping the branches open would be even better for people?
Minister.
The answer is sometimes keeping branches open makes sense, sometimes it does not. And I can't say from the dispatch box that in every single instance it's right to keep all branches open, because as we know, the number of people moving online is very rapid. So sometimes it doesn't make sense, but of course sometimes it does. And it's that judgment that the firms have to make independently, commercially. I don't think we want to live in a world where government ministers get to determine which branches close, which branches open everywhere across the country. I don't think that's a sensible way. I think it's important, I will give way in a second, I think it's important that these are independent commercial decisions. But yes, I give way.
The Minister, of course, says that it's not appropriate for ministers to get involved in individual branch closures, but could he maybe tell us what discussions he's had with the banking industry about the issue of bank closures and what their responses have been?
I'm very happy to talk to the Honourable Lady about this in more detail outside the chamber. What I will say to her on the record is that I have had many discussions with UK Finance, who are the body who represents all the banks, about branch closures, and have worked with them to see if we could speed up the rollout of banking hubs, as I have already outlined. What I would say in the remaining time that I have here, to restate that just a few weeks ago, the 50th banking hub opened, and Link has recommended over 70 more so far. This includes 15 hubs that have already been announced across Scotland, and it's a priority for me that industry continues to deliver to ensure that customers maintain appropriate access. UK Finance has committed to 225 hub locations to be announced by the end of 2024, up from 120 currently. And I conclude by saying this, Sir Charles. It is important that these hubs provide a good service to customers. Following my recent discussions I've held with the high street banks, I'm pleased that industry has agreed to improve the services in hubs to ensure customers have a positive experience. I've communicated those in a Dear Colleague letter to members of the House and written to the Chair of the Treasury Select Committee. We're not completely in a perfect place, but things are improving. Taken together, these measures represent a significant step forward from industry in ensuring all customer needs are appropriately met, and I will continue to monitor the rollout of future banking hubs closely, as indeed I will continue to monitor this whole issue as well.
The question is that this House has considered Royal Bank of Scotland branch closures. And men of opinion say aye. Of the contrary, no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it. Order, order. Right, can we quickly have a quick changeover because we're